Tonight, from Mexico to Vietnam, what's causing millions of people to flee their homes to seek out a new life elsewhere. We'll be focusing on migration. That's after 5 people, including a child, died today when an overcrowded dinghy capsized crossing the English Channel.
I saw them bringing in the bodies on stretchers, and I saw the little girl who I knew. Her father fell into my arms.
And on the US border with Mexico, we hear from families fleeing the violent cartels who are taking over towns and villages.
They kidnapped my husband, and I received threats that they were going to take my children too.
Also this evening, why Rishi Sunak has put the UK on a war footing, unveiling the biggest increase in military spending in a generation. But is it too little too late to counter the looming threats from China and Russia? I'll be asking our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. We'll also be hearing more about the growing row between the United Nations and Israel over this mass grave in southern Gaza. And the free speech war being waged on university campuses across America. I'll speak to one of the first students suspended for staging a pro-Palestinian protest. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Last night, we brought you the action from Parliament as the government pushed through its controversial bill to override the courts and designate Rwanda a safe place for asylum seekers. The Prime Minister views his Rwanda policy as a deterrent. But today, another tragedy in the English Channel made clear just how much migrants are willing to risk for a chance at a different life. On the shores of northern France, these wet, abandoned clothes were all that were left after 5 people, including 1 child, died when their dinghy capsized. There were more than 100 people on board. Many of them travelled on and handed themselves over to the British authorities. Global migration, especially to the world's richest countries, is now at an all-time high, and it's posing problems for governments all around the world. It's an issue we want to keep coming back to on this programme, finding out why people leave and where they end up. We'll be focusing on Mexico and Vietnam tonight, but let's just get started with our first report from our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, in Dunkirk.
Celebrating as they head towards Britain, nearly 60 migrants on an inflatable dinghy with chaos and tragedy in their wake. Many were not meant to be on this boat. We're told dozens rushed aboard at the last moment, like these men in blue jackets, hijacking the boat, pushing the number to 112 passengers. It was too much, and when the boat hit a sandbar, people fell in, and a major rescue operation was triggered. Most were saved, but 5 died, 3 men, a woman, and a small girl. For Sandrine, the grief was personal. She recognised the child who died, knew her family.
I saw them bringing in the bodies on stretchers, and I saw the little girl who I knew. Her father fell into my arms, and I said to myself, this can't be possible. She's a child. They tried to resuscitate her. The helicopters arrived, but she died. And then there were 4 other bodies.
Abandoned on the promenade, the soaking clothes of those who perished.
112 migrants, c'est du jamais vu. Donc il y a eu vraiment une volonté peut-être dans un
112 migrants is unheard of, so there was a real desire, perhaps because of the improved weather, to increase the number of people in the boat, with dire consequences, which we deplore this morning.
sur le bateau avec les conséquences malheureuses que l'on déplore.
The coastal roads full of activity, more migrants led away by police after further failed crossings. But many do succeed. Remember the men in blue jackets. Here's their boat in UK waters as a British lifeboat escorts them to England. The number of small boats crossing the channel is up, and already we've seen more deaths than we did in the entirety of 2023. That's why the government says it needs the Rwanda legislation as a deterrent. For some of these people, the UK is a last hope of claiming asylum. Like these migrants we spoke to, many had tried to settle elsewhere in Europe and told us they were threatened with deportation.
Everyone wants to go to UK.
Why?
Because we have a problem.
European country deport.
Yeah.
Deport. In here, deport.
So you have to leave France?
Yes, France, Deutschland, but deport.
The Rwanda legislation will now enable the government to send people like this to Africa, but there's little sign here it would be a deterrent. You think that Britain would not send you to Rwanda? That wouldn't happen?
No, Rwanda, no. Rwanda, Africa.
No,
Rwanda, Africa, no good. No safe.
You think life would be a lot better in the UK?
Yes.
This coastline is long and wavering, and it's hard to police. Overnight, 5 smugglers were arrested, but at dawn, we filmed a series of boats, all setting off to cross the channel. There is no sign here that the flow is slowing.
And Adam joins us now live from Dunkirk. And Adam, when I think about that little girl on that dinghy, it's such a tragedy as we get more information about the incident today. Looks like we're having sound issues. I don't know if you can hear me, Adam, or if your crew can, but we can't actually hear you.
Oh. Well,
there you go.
Maybe I'll raise my voice, Yalda.
There we go.
See if I can shout out to you. But we were talking about the horrific nature of this, Yalda, and I was here a few years ago when 31 people died in one of these boat tragedies. But often these deaths are a variation on a theme, on overladen boats that get into difficulty out at sea. I think this one people will look at in a rather different cast. Because this happened near to shore and was probably the result not simply of a grotesquely overladen boat, but of violence on the shore, of hijacking. It seems that one group, organised by people smuggler, had brought their boat down to the shore as per normal, and just as it was about to set off, another group came in rather violently, armed with sticks, battered their way through that lot, jumped on the boat, took control of it. A man in a balaclava seized control of the engine. That's why there were 112 people on this boat. So it was ridiculously overladen, sinking down in the water, hit a sandbar, and then 2 people went into the water. Those are the 2 people we understand drowned, including that little girl. What is not clear is how it ended up with 3 other people dying in that boat. What we do know is that when the emergency services got to them, obviously the dead people were taken off. So also were dozens of others who brought the boat to the shore and I think were fearful for their lives. Many of those who continued in that boat and went to Britain, in those images we saw you, were from the group that fought their way to take control of that boat. That rather violent image of hijacking of rival groups, and I think goes along with the growth in violence in these migrant camps in recent times, is something that the authorities here and in Britain will worry about and will investigate.
Indeed. And just listening there to your report, you asked one of the migrants about the Rwanda scheme and potentially going there, and it was a flat no. I imagine that is the view from all of those that you've spoken to.
Yeah, over the course of time, migrant groups here and in other places have slowly become aware of this Rwanda scheme. But I think at the moment, when you talk to people, there is no hint that it is any kind of deterrence. Now, if suddenly a huge number of people were being deported, or if it was a case of everyone who arrives on one of these boats is processed and sent immediately to Rwanda, maybe that would be a deterrent. But when you talk to people, you get a whole broad brush of ideas. Number one, well, that they don't believe in the scheme at all. They simply think it's propaganda. They don't think it will work. They take a moral position. One person said to me, it is not fair. You cannot send me to Africa when I am seeking asylum. And then there are others who say, well, it'll only be a small number of people, and frankly don't think it will come down to them. But overwhelmingly, Yalda, the people who arrive here in northern France have already gone through perilous journeys to get here with one intention, and that is to get to Britain. And even the prospect of the Rwanda scheme at the moment certainly is not going to be enough to deter them from that ambition.
Indeed. Adam, thank you so much for all of your reporting there. Well, the number of migrants being removed from the UK have fallen over recent years, but how does it compare to other countries across Europe? Well, our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire is here to explain. So, Tom, we've got this new scheme. Are we likely to see more people being removed?
Yes, but a very small number, because we actually do remove a lot of people. If you go through the data and look at how it's changed since 2010, especially as you were mentioning. So this is the number of people who are returned to their home country from the UK. This is the total since 2010, and this includes all sorts of things. This isn't just small boats. This is, people who are just asked to leave the country. And this is the people who are asked to leave the country, but they're not willing to leave the total. So these are enforced returns. And you can see that over there. This is the pandemic period where it really drops. We have had that slight uptick, but those numbers are really, really down on where they were back in the day. If we look at asylum seekers in particular, that's a bit more relevant. Again, it's not quite the same as Rwanda, because that's people coming here illegally on those small boats especially. This is asylum returns just in general. Much smaller number than that big number. But again, this drop, it's a bit hard to see. We've kept the same scale. And then you see how we compare to other countries. So you've got Germany, they return the most people in Europe. France, there. UK, actually kind of middle of the pack. We are third. We're just behind France in this. So we are retaining a lot. This isn't quite a like-for-like comparison, but there are sort of similarities there that, sort of suggest people are taking different numbers of migrants. They're trying to deport different numbers of migrants. But the UK is sort of doing kind of mid-table when it comes to those sorts of things.
So I guess the other question then is, this isn't going to have much of an impact then.
Yeah, I mean, the government would argue otherwise. But look, put it in terms of the big numbers. That's where the UK is in terms of that. So, again, not doing too badly. But the big numbers here, in terms of asylum applications in 2023, 67,000, more than that. Nearly 30,000 of those from small boats. We know it's more this year. So we understand that right now, Rwanda's capacity is 200. So that's not going to put a dent in that, obviously. The government will say, well, actually, that will have a deterrent effect. Hearing from Adam, it doesn't sound like it will have a deterrent effect. But they say that small boats number will come down because of the people being sent to Rwanda. But then if you think also about the scheme of this, so over 5 years, that's 1,000 people. The UK will be paying more than £600 million for that. It works out more than £600,000 per migrant. It is a very expensive bet for the government now to be making.
Tom, thank you, as always, for helping us with those numbers and explaining all of that. Now, Rishi Sunak claims the number of migrant arrivals from Vietnam have increased tenfold, accounting for almost a total increase in small boat numbers since the beginning of this year. But what's causing the increase? A new surge in Vietnamese migrants. Rishi Sunak has admitted to a tenfold increase and said he was doing more to tackle it.
Just as we succeeded in reducing Albanian arrivals dramatically, so I'm confident we will do the same when it comes to the Vietnamese.
So why has the number of Vietnamese migrants making the perilous journey across the English Channel been increasing? The latest figures from the Home Office show that the number of crossings made by Vietnamese nationals has been rising for the past 3 years. Around 500 migrants arrived in 2022, while over 1,300 came to the UK in 2023. That figure will soon be surpassed as 1,266 people have already made the crossing so far this year.
People smugglers are risking lives.
Last month, the Home Office changed tactics and launched a series of social media adverts. It featured testimonies from people who made the crossing and regret it. You'll remember that in 2019, one of the worst migrant tragedies in this country involved Vietnamese migrants. 39 people, 31 men and 8 women who died in a refrigerator lorry trailer in Essex. Back then, families of the victims shared their pain and frustration. This all led to a crackdown on lorry security in the UK, which forced smugglers to use alternative routes. Which is why Rishi Sunak says almost all the increase in migrant-carrying small boats arriving across the English Channel is down to people from Vietnam. Well, to discuss this further, joining me now is Tamsin Barber, who's a reader in sociology at Oxford Brookes University. Thank you so much. You've got expertise in Vietnamese studies. I mean, who could forget the 39 who were killed, the Vietnamese who were killed or died in that lorry? I mean, every time I think about it, it's just horrifying when their bodies were found.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think at the moment, that tragedy looms very large, certainly in my mind, but in the minds of a lot of people, thinking about how migrant deaths are continuing. OK, we were focusing on lorries in 2019, and now we're focusing on small boats.
I guess the other question is, I just always assumed that a lot of those leaving Vietnam would stay within Asia or go to places like Australia rather than making the kind of long and perilous, dangerous journey to the UK.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of Vietnamese migrants do stay in Asia. Some go to Australia and some come to Europe, and a very small number come to the UK, actually. UK isn't one of the top destinations for people coming from Vietnam.
So tell us about this small boat sort of pattern and why the Vietnamese are choosing this as an option.
Well, I mean, actually, I can talk about my research, and my research actually didn't cover the small boats era. So my research finished a couple of years ago, and actually the majority of people that we spoke to had come over in the back of a lorry. In terms of the small boats phenomenon, I think this is a broader pattern of migration, and this is linked into border policing and border patrols, but that's not my area of expertise.
So just tell us a bit more then about the study that you've done.
Yeah, so I conducted research in the UK and in Vietnam with my collaborator Phuc Nguyen in Vietnam, and we interviewed migrant people leaving Vietnam, people in the UK, and then once they'd returned, to try and understand what were the reasons for leaving Vietnam, what was their journey like, and how they reflected on their journey afterwards.
And what were the reasons?
So, I mean, there's a wide variety of reasons, actually, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And those reasons are multiple and complex and often overlapping. So the reasons included political persecution, the need to leave Vietnam, people leaving actually very quickly for fear of their lives, people leaving because of unsustainable livelihoods in their homelands. So the people that we researched were coming from areas in regions that were poor and rural areas, and the majority of people coming to the UK come from those areas. So people coming tend to be very determined and very desperate to come to the UK, or people who are very vulnerable and are coming for humanitarian reasons.
So we talked a little bit about the social media and ad campaign launched by the UK. Do you think it'll make a difference?
Yeah, no, I mean, I really don't think so. I mean, what we know is that, first of all, people coming from Vietnam rarely set out with the UK in mind. It's not the country of destination they have in their minds. They might want to come to Europe, and they might find themselves having to come to the UK, whether that is due to debt bondage or whether they have become a victim of slavery, or exploitation or trafficking en route, and they're seeking sanctuary in the UK. So the Rwanda bill won't have a great impact because people aren't, as I said, not setting out from Vietnam saying, I want to come to the UK. So they're not developing a strong sense of what's the UK immigration policy about. They haven't developed a strong knowledge of that because that's not where they're intending to go.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard stories about those in the lorry not realising they were coming to the UK until they actually arrived and landed.
Yeah, so in our research, many people arrived in the UK not knowing where they were, OK? And then they eventually learned that now they were in the UK, and they've then begun to understand what were their rights, what were the immigration laws in the UK. That happens afterwards, not beforehand. So this bill is not going to act as a deterrent for those migrants. And I think it's very important to say that, if the 39 deaths of fellow countrymen from Vietnam is not a deterrent enough for migrants to come to the UK, then I really don't know what is.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, Tamsin, Barber, we're grateful you've joined us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, migration across the US-Mexico border will be one of the biggest issues at the US presidential election in November, with the crisis being worsened by the rise in cartel violence. We've been hearing from the two migrants, Oneida and Maria, whose names we've changed for their safety, who are hoping to cross the border into Tijuana in Mexico.
Bueno, mi nombre es Oneida Padilla. Sí, pues mi nombre es María y vengo del estado de Guerrero. Y yo salí de allá porque decidí sacar a mis hijos por tanta violencia que hay allá. Secuestraron a mi esposo y también amenazas que se iban a llevar a mis hijos también. Bueno, yo vengo de Honduras y y pues ahí había mucha violencia, que los mareros, que la delincuencia, mataban a las mujeres, a las jóvenes.
Hi, my name is Albert Rivera, and we have an immigrant shelter here called Agape in Tijuana, Mexico. Our shelter is an immigrant shelter, especially for single moms and families and widows. The majority of the problem is too much violence. They're fleeing from drug cartels that they're fighting over turf. It's cartel against cartel, and in the middle are these women and these families.
Y por eso decidí venirme pues mejor, y por eso quiero ir a Estados Unidos para ponerme a trabajar y para que no los encuentren a ellos, porque me da miedo que me los vayan a quitar. Porque allá donde vivimos nosotros, se los llevan de 14 años, de 13 años, se los llevan para que sean los primeros que mandan a las guerras.
And when they start kidnapping people, all these families start to flee. They go to the United States, go look for political asylum. All these women are just looking for just protection.
Toda la gente que encuentran, de donde quiera se la llevan, niños, mujeres, las mujeres para violarlas, para que vivan con ellos. Nunca me imaginé que iba a poner un pie aquí, nunca, la verdad, nunca. Pero me duele, dejé a mi mamá allá, a mi familia, a mis hermanas, y pues yo prácticamente aquí ando sola. Pues sí, mi mayor anhelo es entrar a Estados Unidos, la verdad.
That was the voices of two women on the Mexican border, and we'll be coming back to migration in the months ahead here on the programme. Next up, Rishi Sunak puts the UK on a war footing and pledges billions on defence spending. But is it too little, too late?
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. Now, there have been conversations across Europe about the need to counter the threat from Russia. Well, today, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to increase defence spending by tens of billions by the end of this decade. But is it enough to fill the black hole in MOD funding? The Prime Minister has promised an extra £75 billion in defence spending over 6 years. By the end of the decade, total defence spending is to reach £87 billion, increasing the UK's spend to 2.5% from currently 2.25%. The government has pledged an additional £10 billion over the next 10 years to boost munitions productions. He made that announcement today in Warsaw, in Poland. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, travelled with him and sent us this report.
The Prime Minister touching down in Poland, flanked by his Chancellor and Defence Secretary, off the plane and on a war footing. The Prime Minister at a Polish military base, shoulder to shoulder with NATO's Secretary General and his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk, coming together as they contemplate a more dangerous world, and the PM offering more money for more of this. £500 million to help halt Putin at Poland's border.
Today I'm announcing the biggest strengthening of our national defence for a generation. We will increase defence spending to a new baseline of 2.5% of GDP by 2030. That starts today and rises steadily in each and every year. Over the next 6 years, we'll invest an additional £75 billion in our defence. And it will be fully funded with no increase in borrowing or debt. Today is a landmark moment in the defence of the United Kingdom. This is a generational investment in British security and British prosperity. It makes us safer at home and stronger abroad.
A sign of the times this PM feels we're living in, harking back to the man who led us through the Second World War.
As Churchill said in 1934, to urge the preparation of defence is not to insert the imminence of war. We did not choose this moment, but it falls to us to meet it.
You talk about Europe being at a turning point and this spending putting the UK on a war footing. Have we entered a pre-war era?
I quoted Churchill earlier, that we have to recognise that the world, as I said, is in a more dangerous place than it's been since the end of the Cold War. Now, this is not something new. What is new is, I think, the pace and intensity of where we're seeing these threats emerge.
We are safe as long as we stand together. I cannot tell you exactly what the next crisis or the next war will be, but what I can tell you is that if we stand together, we will be able to protect and preserve peace for NATO allies.
On St George's Day, here we are.
This PM mindful of voters at home too. As threats increase, so does the cost of peace. But his first priority clear. The security of his citizens matters above all else. Europe's at a turning point and the UK's defence industry is on a war footing. The Prime Minister here in Poland with a clear message. He will be a strong leader in dangerous times. But there's a domestic play here too. He has now announced that defence funding his party so longed for, and the hope will be it might appeal too to some lapsed Conservative voters, all quite handy ahead of the local elections. And questions now for Labour, which has promised to lift defence spending to 2.5% of GDP as soon as resources allow.
In Parliament, in our politics, we've stood united on the question of Ukraine since the conflict began. We will continue to do so. So I support the money the Prime Minister has put forward and urge all allies to work together on this.
The PM arriving in Berlin tonight, opening a new chapter in our defence partnership. Whether he'll be here to deliver that is another question as we eye that general election. But his spending choices set a challenge for fellow Europeans and Keir Starmer too. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Berlin.
Well, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes is here with me. Deborah, the key words here are pledge and promise. Nothing has actually been put down, it's not concrete here. He's just announcing something.
He is, and the language is strong, so putting the defence industry on a war footing. People have been crying out for that kind of language, frankly, for the last 2.5 years, since Russia put its own economy on a war footing as it launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So why, Rishi Sunak, he's not a new Prime Minister. Why has it taken so long to come out and say this? Nothing's changed since his integrated review refresh last year. He had put this 2.5% pledge as a caveated against fiscal conditions, and now suddenly has decided to get rid of that, announce this big move. But in terms of the real money that defence is going to see this year before the election, it's zero new money. There's £500 million of additional cash, but that's all going to Ukraine, which is clearly needed. But for the armed forces themselves, sources tonight have said to me, where is the money? And it's clearly not going to come until after the election.
So then the question is, where is the money? Are you saying there is no money? It's just an announcement?
It's just an announcement at the moment. Clearly, it's an ambition. So he set out the ambition to get to 2.5%. Many people will say that ambition is woefully small. It's going back to the level that defence spending was at in 2010. And look at the change in the threat. During the height of the Cold War, our defence spending was double that ratio of GDP. And if you're really believing what the Defence Secretary says, when he says we're a pre-war world, then people believe we should be spending much more, much smarter and much faster.
And talk to me about that, because when I have spoken to, military analysts and officials, they've often said just throwing money at the situation doesn't also resolve it. You have to be smart about what you actually invest that kind of money in.
100%, and there's a massive problem with defence inflation. So the cost of weapons, the value for money that the UK gets at the moment is very questionable. There's also the MOD with its terrible history of procurement disasters, wasting more money. So there's a real concern that if you just throw a huge lump of cash at them, it won't be spent well. And so that's why, they do need to have a bit of time to understand what they're going to spend this new money on. But they've had all this time, and they don't even have a defence plan for the defence of the UK, a national defence plan to ensure that the military that is supposed to, the primary role, the defence of the realm, ensure they're configured correctly as part of a NATO force. They don't even have that plan. And so they've got a long way to go, and they haven't had the political direction. They've now got that, but given that we're in an election year, it's a little bit too late.
So, Deborah, would you say then, is it fair to say that people are slightly confused tonight, or there is some clarity? We just don't know where the money is at this stage, and it's just part of an election promise?
The problem is he's not going to be in power necessarily for long enough to be able to deliver on this pledge. So while he's setting out his stall, this is his ambition, this is his vision, this is what he believes the UK needs. Clearly, Labour have also got their vision. They've caveated that 2.5% lift with the borrowing rules, but they're going to come under pressure to change that, surely. So it does set out where the UK is going. But in terms of the real reality changing on the ground, I just don't think it's going to happen until after the next election. And if Labour wins, they've promised a defence review, which means yet another year of delay potentially until we see any change.
Deborah, thanks so much for clarifying all of that for us. Now, stay with us, because we are going to be hearing more about a mass grave discovered in Gaza. The United Nations says some bodies were found with their hands tied. Israel's military has denied responsibility. Welcome back. Israel's military has denied claims its forces are responsible for what's being described as a mass grave holding hundreds of bodies in Gaza. The UN rights chief says he's horrified by what was discovered at Nasser Hospital in Gaza's Khan Yunis soon after the site was abandoned by Israeli forces. Well, Nasser Hospital is the second city, and Nasser Hospital is in the second city of Khan Yunis and was one of the largest in Gaza, but Israel claimed Hamas was using it as a base. As Israeli forces surrounded the area, staff buried dozens of bodies in late January and early February. But after the IDF entered the hospital complex, satellite images and video verified by Sky News shows Israeli soldiers operating heavy machinery in the makeshift cemetery. And a warning that this report from our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, and our team in Gaza contains distressing images of dead bodies from the start.
When the hospital morgues ran out of room, they turned to the car park. In protective suits and masks, with death all around them, the civil volunteers uncover this mass grave, pulling the bodies from the sandy earth, one by one. Israeli forces have now withdrawn from Khan Yunis, but before they did, they too dug up these corpses. The IDF says they were looking for hostages, but Palestinians and the UN have accused them of desecrating the dead. Over the last 5 days, they've found more than 300 bodies, and they're digging for more. Each one is unwrapped. Inside are the decomposing bodies of men, women, and young children. If a body cannot be identified or isn't collected by family, they're rewrapped in clean sheets and buried again in unmarked graves. Moya Yed found his mother yesterday. It took him time to recognise what was left of her. He's back again today, still looking for his sister, father and cousin.
Solve this issue with the world. Solve it with the Israelis. We want a solution. We want to rest. There's no life. It's all for nothing. I feel sad, lonely, alone in the world.
Every so often, someone finds what they had come looking for, but hadn't wanted to believe. After 2 months searching for him, the body of Karima's youngest son, Ahmed, has just been uncovered. They took him from me, they killed him, she screams. Israel, America, and Britain are to blame, she wails. The bodies are gently laid out in the shade. The names, if known, written on each one. Karima sits by her son, but surrounded by so many others. A moment of silence for her, alone in her own thoughts. Later that day, Ahmed is taken to the cemetery for a proper burial. Karima helps carry him through the streets of Khan Yunis, where nothing or no one has been left untouched.
I spent 2 months, 2.5 months of me looking for him. Thank God, I was scared that he was thrown for dogs or cats to eat him, just like I saw dogs eat other dead bodies with my own eyes.
The final act of a grieving mother is to bury her son next to his father and her husband. With the 2 men of Karima's family now side by side in death, the cries of anger turn to prayer and tears of overwhelming grief. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
A disgrace is how former US President Donald Trump described a wave of pro-Palestinian protests that are spreading across universities in the country.
The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated.
Hundreds of students have been arrested at demonstrations at Yale, Columbia and New York University while calling for the schools to divest from companies with ties to Israel. Well, Marie Adele Grosso was one of the first to be arrested at Columbia University. She joins me live now from New York. Thank you very much, Marie, for joining us here on the programme. Can you just tell me what happened to you?
Yeah, of course. So, what we set out to do was to bring awareness to the situation in Palestine, the situation in Gaza, and bring awareness to how we as Columbia students are complicit and our university is complicit and what needs to change. We created a peaceful protest that students were more inspired to join, more inspired to learn more, and it really did grow throughout the days that we were there and the days that have kept going. Colombia chose to respond uh, to a peaceful protest with a very violent solution of calling the NYPD. And they showed that they were not going to listen to their students and that they were not going to care about Palestine and Gaza, care about the people that you just saw in the program earlier. And
But Marie, how did it escalate from, because you've been protesting for a number of months, and as you say, it's sort of grown now. How did it go from that sort of a demonstration that was organised to the police being called? You say they were peaceful. How did the university get itself into a position where it's called the police and you were arrested and you were charged and you will have to go to court in May sometime?
Yes. So we were on the lawn of our campus. It was all Columbia University ID holders. And at that point, the university had requested that we leave the lawn because they wanted the protest to end. And they wanted our voices to be silenced. And at that point, we did choose to refuse to leave. And Columbia University decided that they would respond with violence and start arresting us. And they really were, this was, to my knowledge, a unilateral call from our president, our university president, who told the police to come and arrest.
So you were accused then and charged of trespassing, essentially. That's what they're saying you've done.
Yes. But yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say yes, although at this point, again, we were our university students on our own campus.
So I just want to understand, because obviously this whole thing's escalated. There are a number of students, Jewish students, who say they were intimidated, there were anti-Semitic slurs, statements like "go back to Poland." Can you clarify all of this?
So obviously I can't hear every single thing that was said, but everyone I know was organizing both with Jewish students, and everyone I know that was organizing was very intentional about what we were saying to, again, go back to supporting Palestine, supporting Gaza. We actually did host a fairly well-attended and large Sabbath and Passover in the protest itself. We have wonderful Jewish students who are participating and really are would really not like to have their identity erased and glossed over. We, at this point, our entire goal of this protest is to bring awareness to Gaza, stop the killing of innocent civilians, and that's what our messaging has stayed as and will continue to be.
And so these remarks that were made, and I know you say you can't hear absolutely everything, but obviously it's upset and left students intimidated. Did they happen inside the campus, or there are also reports that it happened outside the gates of the campus?
So I can't speak to every moment, and I was not part of the protest outside the campus, so I can't speak to what happened there. But every chant that I heard and every sign that I saw was totally focused on our goal. And even if there are those outliers, our movement as a whole would really is really focused again on Gaza, on the people of Gaza, on preventing the deaths of children. And that's something that anyone should be able to see as a reasonable cause and a cause they should join.
And just very briefly, Marie, will you continue these demonstrations despite, a number of the students being arrested?
Absolutely. We will continue these demonstrations until our university divests, until our university meets our demands and divests from Israel and shows that they care about Palestine, they care about their students, and shows that they are listening to their students.
OK, Marie, thank you for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Now, a New York judge is considering whether to hold former US President Donald Trump in contempt of court or fine him for social media posts that prosecutors say have broken a gag order. Donald Trump is on trial, accused of falsifying business records to pay hush money to porn star Stormy Daniels to cover up their alleged affair ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Well, Donald Trump's biographer, Michael Wolff, has been following the case and joins me now. And Michael, thanks very much for joining us here on the programme. Just give us a sense of what happened in court today.
You know, there were two parts of today. In the morning, there was a hearing on the prosecution's call for a contempt citation to the former president. They argued that he has violated the judge's gag order by various, and matter of fact, by 10 specific social media posts. So the argument was the prosecution laid out its argument, and then the defense responded. And the interesting thing was how strong the prosecution's argument was and how weak the defense was. And I think the defense both had a weak argument and a phenomenally weak presentation. So at one point, the judge said to Donald Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, he said, "You have lost all credibility with me." Ouch. So I think that was a moment, I think, when I think we're going to look back on when as this unfolds and as Donald Trump becomes, I predict, more and more frustrated with his legal team. The second part of the day was on the witness stand a man by the name of David Pecker, who was the publisher of the supermarket tabloid, The National Enquirer. Now, he's right at the heart of this case because he is the one and his company, American Media, which he is no longer part of, organized the payment of money to various of the women who have been accusing Donald Trump of having a sexual relationship with them, and of a doorman at Trump Tower who alleged to have information about a love child Donald Trump was alleged to have, and that in fact turned out to be totally false. But it didn't make any difference. They paid off the doorman, they paid off at least one of the women, and then facilitated the payment to Stormy Daniels, who is also at the center of this case. So that testimony has begun to unfold. It will continue into Thursday. The court is off tomorrow, and then David Pecker will face cross-examination.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. But Michael, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. And as Michael was saying there, the court is not in session on Wednesday, and the trial will resume Thursday morning. And of course, we will be following every twist and turn. Stay with me. More of the action from inside the court in a moment.
Coming up on Sky News at 10, we'll assess Rishi Sunak's big boost for the defence budget and be live in Berlin as the Prime Minister arrives there from Poland. And the Welsh Government does a U-turn on the unpopular policy to reduce many roads to 20 miles an hour. More at 10.
With lockdown, which it has an impact on a lot of things, people felt that they needed a dog as a companion because they were isolated. So during that period of time, there was an extra 4 million dogs bought. So before lockdown, we had about 8 million dogs in this country. After lockdown, we have 12 million. Now, a lot of these have bought dogs because of what they like the look of, or it suits their personality or type or whatever. Unfortunately, when I first started working with XL bullies. Many, many years ago, as an expert witness under the Dangerous Dogs Act, I used to assess these dogs. They were quite reasonable. They were very, very reasonable. But what happened in about 2021 to 2022 is the bloodlines and varying other things changed. And because of that change, suddenly we found an enormous amount of more deaths. In fact, 4 times more deaths in 2022 than we'd ever seen over the last 30 years. 75% of all the deaths between 2021 and end of 2023 were down to XL bullies that did that attack, including a lot of other attacks that didn't end up in fatality. They wanted a different bloodline. There's a particular bloodline, and it's been said that over 50% of all the dogs in Great Britain are part of this particular XL bullies bloodline, Kimbo, over in America, and they transferred his sperm over here. They've been messing about with DNA and variant other things. And Kimbo, unfortunately, was a result of a pairing between a brother and sister. These dogs were bred initially for fighting, so they have a preponderance towards aggression in that case. A lot of these dogs have been very, very good, but some of these bloodlines, and in particular that one, Kimbo, is an absolute monster. It really is.
Well, that's it for tonight's programme. We'll be covering migration and Donald Trump over the next few weeks, and of course, looking at all the issues that both of these stories entail. We'll have much more on the migration story. We'll have specials coming up over the next couple of weeks, so do stay with us for that. For now, the news at 10 is up next. Good night.